Whether you are running a huge organization or a small business, one of the challenges everyone faces is finding the right talent. This can be especially daunting if you're looking for senior people with more specialized skill sets. It's not just finding the right person. It's about finding the right person with the right skills and who's the right fit for your company, and doing it in the shortest amount of time. For many businesses, especially the tech sector, but not exclusively, this has led to a global outreach where companies need to be able to recruit and evaluate candidates from multicultural backgrounds. But is there an efficient and effective way to vet a large pool of candidates and determine with any level of accuracy who might be the best person for a specific job? I'm Jane Singer, and thank you for joining me here on A Seat at the Table. It's great to have you as part of our international community that now includes industry leaders in over 100 countries. In this episode, I'm speaking with Alex Svinov, CEO and co-founder of Insquad, a company that helps tech startups find developers 4 times faster and build remote-first teams. Insquad has developed a method that shortens the recruitment process and saves time screening hundreds of CVs or resumes. Alex's company has an impressive 80% plus hire-to-interview rate and has worked with over 300 tech startups. But the methodology he's developed at Insquad could be applied to any industry, not just the tech sector. There's a lot we can learn from Alex's experience, including a faster, more efficient way to find the right talent, why a candidate's mindset is as important as their skill set, and how remote working can enable companies to tap into rich talent pools from around the world, and often from markets that we hadn't even thought about. Before we get started, if you're a supply chain executive who'd like to finally put an end to information overload and get a concise, fact-based summary of key market developments and shifts, as well as sharp insights as to what's likely to impact sourcing in the coming months, then the current situation in sourcing is exactly what you're looking for. To learn more, head on over to thecurrentsituation.net. That's thecurrentsituation.net, where you can get all of the details. And I'll also include the links in the show notes for this episode. Now let's find out how Alex has reduced the hiring process from 2 months to 2 weeks and is able to find the right candidates. I'm really happy to have you on A Seat at the Table, Alex, because one of the things that you focus on is something that almost everybody that listens to this podcast faces at one point or another, and that is trying to recruit talent, how to hire people effectively, and how to onboard them quickly. It's sort of a hurdle that so many people face. So perhaps you can start by sharing some of what you've learned.
Yeah. Thanks very much for having me. Great to be here. There are a few things that I was, come up to my mind when I think about hiring the developers or tech talents. And I think this is important to maybe important to all your listeners, is that the process that a lot of organizations have these days ends up in, hiring developers in, 2-4 months period. And also they cost a lot. And the reason for that is because there's so few developers that are out there, and there are so many opportunities that are, chasing them.
Right.
So I've kind of looked at this and maybe a couple of years ago, and this is where Insquad idea came along, because I thought, hiring developers with the current technology state, it shouldn't be that complicated. There should be, ways to make it simple. And so that's the 2 things that I think that most people don't notice is that first, that the process itself is very clumsy when it comes to sorting the resumes, inviting the candidates to interview, getting every candidate through the tests, and it's just takes a lot of time. It has a lot of people involved, and certainly technology could help here. That's one thing. And another thing is that if you try to chase the same number of candidates, if 100 vacancies are chasing 10 candidates, there is no way you can fill them, right?
Right.
So that's why we look abroad. That's why we look to underprivileged territories like like India, like Africa, like South America and Eastern Europe. And there we see there is lots of talent. There is super high quality talent there. And obviously, a lot of people are very keen to work in a US or in European startup project or in a large organization with a good practices, and that's where it all kind of clicked.
So in terms of hiring people from these countries, I mean, it's challenging enough to hire people in your own country. When you're trying to hire people from a different country, and perhaps it's a country you don't have much experience working in, what, from your experience, are some of the critical things that people can do in order to identify the right candidates and then test or in some way vet to see, is this really the right person with the right experience and the right skill set for what I'm looking for?
First and foremost, I think that there's no such thing as the best candidate out there. I mean, for every job, you obviously have requirements, but then you have to know well what do you really need to have for this candidate and what you would like to have. Because again, with this market, you have to focus on 2 or 3 key things and then forget about the rest, or you will, end up shopping around for quite long. Now, with what people should be probably doing when going abroad is first, I think, pay attention on first, maybe standardize their process as we do it in Insquad, for example, when we ask every developer to go first to take a test, then take coding challenge, and then we have a video interview, right? And in that really helps when you put like 100 candidates through this funnel. Takes every candidate maybe two hours to complete, and it takes about, I don't know, 2 hours, 1 hour of your time, and this shortens the period of your going through the candidates, and maybe in 2-3 days you already have 1 or 2 interviews, and this is quite important, to get as fast through the funnel, because a lot of times, like I said, there's a process of back and forth, and you lose the candidates while they're going back and forth with your emails and setting up the calls.
Yeah, I think that's an important consideration. When you're looking at these different candidates, are there specific things you look for?
I think what we try to focus, apart from technical abilities, which we take as a prerequisite for an interview with a candidate. So we take all the technical tests before we start the interview, and that's important. What we are looking on the interview itself is what are cultural values of the candidate, and we develop a test of, I think it's about 50 questions long. It's all about, putting the candidate in different types of situations and how the candidate would react in them. That this way we measure whether the candidate will be capable of working in a Western style environment, because a lot of times, especially in countries like India, for example, we have a lot of times candidates that think quite differently, and they have never worked with a US company, and it is quite hard for them to switch their mindset, and that can be actually a problem. And we had an example of the guy who was like, he was working on a project, and he knew that he's gonna miss the deadline, but he was afraid to talk to his US manager, and ultimately he missed the deadline. So this is the type of question we would definitely ask. What's your behavior when you think you might miss a deadline? How would you talk about that? And there is a lot of other red flags like that that we've developed for many cultures.
It's an important point you bring up, because I'm not saying this specifically about India, but I think that in certain cultures, people who are employees feel very reticent about coming to the boss with any kind of a problem. So the natural reaction is to put it into a drawer or bury it under a pile of papers, whereas other cultures, people feel much more confident to approach a senior level person, or even if it's just one person, one tier above them, and say that this is a problem. I need to talk about this with you. Are there ways that companies can work around that, or is that just such a strong cultural aspect for certain cultures that it's very difficult for someone who's not native to that culture to surmount?
Well, I think there definitely are ways. It's very important to learn how to work with these differences because with a post-COVID remote world, certainly, we're not going back to the situation when, in US we hire developers in US, in Europe we hire developers from Europe. It's going to be global. And,
Right.
if you don't learn how to do that, you're just going to be behind the competition. Now, what we've learned in our experience that fostering open communication and inviting all team members and trying, to show them how flat the organization is quite often helping, because a lot of guys out there, they have great ideas, but they are, like you said, they are afraid to talk to their boss, and all these great ideas are going nowhere. So what we had this example when we had a team of developers, and we had a brainstorming session, and first they were all sitting not participating, and there were a couple of Americans guys there, and they were started talking, and maybe 5-10 minutes later all these Indian guys, got engaged, and one of them he actually pulled out. He had that. Can you imagine that he had a list of 50 ideas that he had structured in a doc?
Wow.
So he pulled that out maybe 15 minutes later, and it was just incredible. I mean, of course, not all of them were just great, but I think 10 or 15 of them were just, right to the point, and
Wow.
nobody ever thought about it, because the nature of developer work is that you have to go very deep in an understanding of your particular piece of code, and nobody else knows your piece of code as well as you do.
True.
So you gotta rely on on everybody's knowledge and everybody's ideas. Yeah, so talking a lot, giving opportunity to have open voice, and promoting that, and asking for feedback. And in some cases, actually, we had another case that would be maybe interesting. We asked, there was a team of US team lead and 3 developers from India, and he could not get feedback from the guys. So his manager actually asked one of the Indian developers, to ask two of his teammates to give feedback to the team lead. And that way it worked better, because in India they have a lot of hierarchy, and if they're being asked by their teammate, it's easier for them to open and their opinions to their boss. I think that's the other way you could look at it.
Yeah, I think that's quite accurate, and I can say that it's probably the case throughout most of Asia. You would find that maybe more, less so in Western cultures, but I think that in other cultures you would find that, yes, you're right. The hierarchy in a company is very strongly, it's tough to navigate that. So you're right, that can be very challenging to encourage people to speak up. But I think, what you've suggested, to try to create this sort of a forum for people to express ideas and bring things up, is very, very important. Now, when you're working with people in these different countries, in addition to feeling confident to speak, are there other things that you've noticed, other nuances, things that people need to be aware of?
What I can definitely say, and first, I would also want to agree with your point about, that it's not only about India. This is true a lot about Africa as well, and even, Eastern Europe, where we also are quite active. So it's more, more Eastern world versus Western world in this respect. As for other things that, come up to my mind is that if you do manage to build a strong relationship with your developers, for example, India or Nigeria or Pakistan or Asia, what we've seen is that they become truly high performing assets for you, in a sense that they can, they can easily work overtime. I of course wouldn't promote that, but get so much, passion from what they do, and so it's quite so important for them to, to be delivering a good result, because they feel a lot of bondage with you as the team. They have much less of I and much more of we mentality. Yeah, so they are becoming a real team, real good team members, and they can stay for quite a while with the company. We have examples in our business when they stay like year or 2 years or 3 years with the same company, and they are doing very well. Yeah, so it's I think this is the reason why we're in this business, because we truly believe that building these bonded teams, remote teams, is gonna be the future of software development.
I like the way you framed the I versus we, and I think that's very, very true. And I think it's an interesting thing because there's pros and cons no matter where you work in the world. But I do think the point you made is very important, particularly now when we see oftentimes in the West, people are being encouraged more to be thinking about me rather than we. And I think that, of course, you always want to have a balance, but for a lot of companies, it does become frustrating when you're trying to build that kind of team, and especially when you're trying to achieve sometimes very tough goals. So I think it's really good that you brought that up. Now, what do you see that most employers, when they're hiring people outside of their own culture, what do they often, do you believe, overestimate? We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be right back.
We were hiring when we were making 50 to 100K monthly losses.
And why? Welcome to episode 1.
I can't think of a single founder who's been around for a decent amount of time in business who hasn't had their tunnel of year. This was that year. We're going to be okay, yeah, Sheree. Some are going to hear this and think, you TDP. But hear me out. You only have to do the math to understand that very soon we were $500,000 down.
Well, I think what I've seen in my past experience is that people tend to think about the cultural differences as somewhat phenomena that they cannot overcome, and that they just think that no, these people are totally different. We need to put them in a very rigid mode, so that we have to clearly declare what we need, A, B, and C, and because they're afraid of that. These people with a different culture, they're gonna screw something up or do something wrong, do harm, and obviously, yeah, there are cultural differences, but I think what you got to do is to treat them, in a calmer manner, maybe in a sense that even though those people have a different culture, they can perform work very well. And surprisingly, a lot of times I would see that a developer in India or in Nigeria is culturally much closer to developer in US, because they work in the same context. They solve the same type of problems. Coding is universal, so they are much closer as compared, I don't know, to any other profession maybe. And of course, this globalization is making communication flow very transparent. And I had a funny case when I had an Indian CTO of US company interviewing Indian developer from Insquad, and to me it seemed like they had more cultural differences than many American CTOs would have when they would interview the guys. So so it's really, I think that this whole story about culture difference is overestimated in a sense that it's very easy to learn and to adjust to that. And then once you've learned that, you've got this whole new world of opportunities out there. There's another thing is time zone difference. I think a lot of people are talking about that, and that we know we have a lot of clients who are talking, no, we want only US time zone. And I think if you look at the way that developers work, time zone difference is not something that is a hell of an obstacle, because how much do you need to talk to the person, right? He's writing code or developing something. You would need to talk to him when you onboard him, maybe 2-3 times a day. But as the person performs better and better, maybe once or twice a week, you need to have an actual call. Of course, then you would have emails and chats. And in that respect, it's pretty simple. A lot of people in Asia or in Africa, Europe, they're accustomed to working in late hours, and they just, have a different lifestyle. So they do something in the morning and they start working at 3 p.m. and, work until like 12 a.m. or something. And that's okay with them. And guys work like that for years. So it seems like a good practice.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. I think that oftentimes people who come from Western cultures are used to a workday that follows the traditional 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. And whereas people who are in other countries are oftentimes, like you say, used to a much more fluid work week kind of a structure. So it is it is very different to think about it. And I think that you're right. Now that we're in a more globalized environment, everybody has to be a bit more flexible and has to be able to adapt to different time zones in order to get the maximum benefit that they can get from different talent pools around the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe you can take a couple of minutes and tell me a little bit about what you specifically do at Insquad.
Yeah, thanks for asking. We source developers from all over the world. We ask them to go through our vetting process. And this is, I think, very important part of what we do, is because the reality these days is that the more information you know about your candidate, the better the chances that you will match him with the right employer, right job. So we ask them to go through coding quizzes, and then we ask them to go through a live interview, where we also go through the cultural questions, and we then collect all the data. We enrich that with other sources that we find on the internet, and then we help them get matched with a project in US or in Europe. I think one of our clients has told us that before COVID, it did work with him that he had to hire a developer. He needed to go through 20 or 30 resumes. He would have 5 to 10 interviews. He would do 1 or 2 job offers, and he would have one person on job.
Wow!
And after COVID, because the market has become so much wider, there has been so many opportunities out there that he has now to go through 100 resumes and then have 20 interviews, make 10 job offers. 3 people will accept job offer and only 1 will land a job. So the amount of work that recruiters have to do these days has grown, 5-10 times. And this is where the platforms like us are helping, because we go standardize the process, everybody goes through this. We lower the cost of finding the talent, and that way we can pass a lot of savings to our customers. At the same time, doing a good job for developers in countries like India or Nigeria, where essentially they cannot find a lot of great opportunities. So to me, what we do have a lot of social aspect, and that's what I'm loving about it. We had a case again when a startup with a Series B startup came to us, and they recently had one of their senior data scientists resign. And I spoke to the COO, and he was really nervous, man, because the resignation, meant that their release is going to be in jeopardy. So he came to us, and he had like 3 interviews, I think, in a week's time, and a senior guy joining his team in 2 weeks, and we helped. And I mean, I really felt the aggravation at the beginning and the happiness at the end when we were talking to these guys. So this means a lot to us in terms of emotional fulfillment on this job.
Right. Yeah, I can definitely see that. And it is wonderful when you're able to help people like that. Now, in addition to Nigeria and India, are there other areas where you see sort of untapped talent right now? Countries,
yeah,
other countries, I mean.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we work with Eastern Europe, now much less so because of the political tensions there. We do work with the guys in Brazil. There are lots of talents in Brazil and in Colombia, and that's more traditional, I guess, for U.S. companies to source there. So Pakistani are pretty active. I think in Filipinos also, got some great talent out there. So it's we're quite wide in terms of our coverage.
Yeah, I think that there is a lot of talent that people overlook because traditionally we haven't thought of those countries, particularly for high-end, this kind of sophisticated technical type of a skill or other types of skills that are much more, I don't know what I'm looking for the right word, advanced. So I think it's interesting that you brought that up.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the statistics, I was actually surprised that in US you've got only 65,000 computer science graduates every year, whereas in India you've got 900,000. So it's 15 times more. And of course, the quality may differ, but it's when they have so many more developers, and that's obvious that you can. It's easier to find quality developer there as well, and I think that's why India is today's number one location for developers, and there are more Indian developers than developers from any other nation. And even if you look at Africa, the reason why we've turned there, because there are just so many good universities that produce developers out there, and there surprisingly there's not too many opportunities for them. So a lot of them are actually turning to US or to Europe to find a job.
It's interesting that you bring that up because we have definitely seen a huge decline in the number of people in the West who are interested in pursuing what's often referred to as STEM, right? Any of the science and math professions. Whereas in many developing nations, that's where everybody wants to be. So it makes sense that you would find more candidates there.
Yeah, it's a really interesting pattern. I don't see the reason why that is happening, but that's definitely what I'm noticing, that it's becoming also very interesting when sometimes on the interview with a client, on the call with a client, and I realized that virtually everybody in his tech team are either from India or from Russia or Ukraine,
right,
or Brazil or somewhere. So it seems like, the technology in these countries is being adopted much faster.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Alex, you've shared so many interesting things. How can people connect with you? Where can they find you?
Yeah, if you are a late seed round or a startup or just a corporation looking to hire developers, you could just connect to me at LinkedIn and we could schedule a free consultancy call. You can find me at LinkedIn I'm Alex Svinov. That's AlexSvinov, and I'll be more than happy to chat with you.
Okay, well, I'm going to include that in the show notes so people have the exact link. And I want to really thank you for joining us today. I've learned a tremendous amount talking to you. I'm sure everybody listening has also. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Jane, and thank you for having me. It was a good experience.
Thank you for joining me here on A Seat at the Table. If you've enjoyed this episode or learned something from it, I'd love to hear about it. If you'd like to support the show, please hit the subscribe button. And if you can take a minute to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or other channels, that would be fabulous. And check out our podcast website, seatpodcast.com. That's SEAT podcast.com. You'll find all kinds of bonus content over there, including ebooks, productivity resources, and a preview of upcoming podcast episodes. And while you're there, take a look at Your Seat at the Table, a new podcast course that will show you step by step exactly what you need to do to land those prestigious guest spots on podcasts. Being a guest on a podcast is a great way to gain visibility and grow your authority. Your Seat at the Table gives you a detailed roadmap with templates to teach you exactly how to achieve this. So head on over to seatpodcast.com. And if there's something you'd like to share, ideas, suggestions, or comments, please feel free to reach out. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you again for joining me today and being part of our international community. I'm Jane Singer, and I'll see you in the next podcast episode.